If you're thinking about picking up an MP5 and getting into the MP5 world, one of the first questions that you're probably going to have to ask yourself is, do you want the iconic original full-size MP5, or do you want its shorter brother, the MP5K or Quartz? Now that is a question that I'm not going to be able to answer for you, and that's going to be up to you to decide which one you want to go with, because there are pluses and minuses to both. Now, if you're looking at a full-size MP5, I already have my video up for my Zenith MKE-made Turkish MP5, but today we're going to be taking a look at the MP5K-PDW, and in particular, mine is going to be a USA-made clone of the MP5K from PTR Industries, specifically the PTR 9KT. Now, I did already go pretty in-depth into the history of the full-size MP5 in the Zenith video, so if you want to look into the development of the MP5 series, that's going to be a video to watch for you. Now today, I'm just going to be talking about the history of the MP5K in particular. The history of the MP5K goes back to the 1970s, and the story is, and to be fair, this is not entirely confirmed, this is mainly a rumor at this point, but there was a South American country that was looking for a more compact version of the MP5 for a security detail for the head of state. And of course, we don't know what country this is or if this story is entirely true, but this was a requirement that eventually led Heckler & Koch to develop a more compact version of the MP5. Now, the main differences between the full-size MP5 and the MP5K, the biggest one's going to be the barrel length. The original MP5 had an 8.9-inch barrel, and the MP5K has a 4.5-inch barrel, so roughly half the length. At the same token, they also had a different receiver design, which is quite a bit shorter than the original MP5 to give you a more compact gun. This is very important for security details who might be running around in, say, suits or something where they're going to be in a very official context and don't want to be having a full-size submachine gun with them for whatever appearances reasons or not to cause a public stir, stuff like that. So they wanted something that was concealable, and that's where we got the MP5K. That original MP5K was released back in 1976, and it's going to be quite a bit different than the gun that I have here for you today. Now, the biggest difference is the original MP5K did not have a stock. It just had an end cap with a sling swivel on it. And for years, that was basically all you could get for the MP5K. And there was also not a muzzle device on the MP5K originally, and it just had a barrel muzzle at the end of the receiver to give you the most compact length possible. Now, while the MP5K was compact enough that you could get it underneath a suit jacket or something like that, they also developed a operational briefcase for it, which is a really interesting design concept. So basically, you would have an MP5K that you could fit into a briefcase, so it is incredibly low profile, and no one would look twice at this guy in a suit walking around with a briefcase, but inside is a submachine gun. There were a couple of different versions of that original operational briefcase. There's one where the gun would actually fit into the case and you would fire it using a trigger that was attached to the handle for the briefcase. And there was also a version that was a breakaway briefcase. So you would essentially hit a button and it would clamshell apart, and there you would have an MP5K. The biggest evolution to the MP5K came in 1991 when Heckler & Koch released what is essentially this guy here today, the MP5K-PDW or personal defense weapon. Now, the story is that that came from a US Navy SEAL requirement where they were looking for a more compact version of an MP5. However, they were looking to use it in a more traditional SMG style of role, so you would want to have a stock for it and then potentially be able to add different accessories. So what Heckler & Koch did is they went to a US company, Choate, for the stock, and that's what we have here today. And then they also added that original 3-lug muzzle device or flash hider from the full-size MP5. When the 2000s came around, full-size submachine guns really lost most of their customer base, primarily because of shorter, compact PDW length rifles and 5.56. Now, the one exception to that is actually with personal defense weapons, because you can still get a 9mm PDW quite a bit more compact than a 5.56 caliber rifle. So to this day, MP5Ks as well as other K-length PCCs or submachine guns still have a use case with protective details, and one of the more famous versions of that is going to be the APC 9K, as it was adopted by the personal security details for the US Army back in around 2019. So there is still a use case for these PDW length submachine guns in the world. Now, there were a couple of different countries that did adopt the MP5K, and they're primarily going to be for police users or for those personal security details or even special forces use. So originally you had Turkey, and they had it for LE usage primarily. Then there's also Bulgaria, Malaysia, the Philippines, South Africa, and then quite a few different protective details, either contractors for security teams or something like that. When it comes to the US civilian market, the MP5K has been coming in for a long time. Back in the late 1980s, we had the SP89, which was the semi-automatic version of the MP5K. It did have some downsides to it because, of course, due to US NFA law, you can't have the vertical grip on there unless it's an SBR or an any other weapon. Mine is an SBR here. So it had a elongated handguard, which is kind of goofy looking. And then back then, of course, braces weren't really a thing, so the only way you'd really shoot that is either using the push sling technique with like a bungee sling, or just freehanding it, which isn't the most accurate way to shoot a PCC. Imports of the SP89 ended in the early 1990s after the ATF changed some of the way that they were looking at different pistols for import into the US, and the SP89 was no longer viable for import. By 2016, though, the rules had changed enough for Heckler & Koch to start re-importing the MP5K into the US, and it came in as the SP5K. Now, there were some more difficulties with actually using that. Again, it's going to have that longer style of handguard on it so that you don't accidentally shoot your thumb off, which would not be ideal. And then also the SP5K, when it came in, was that original MP5K style of barrel where it cut off right at the front sight post essentially and didn't have the 3 lugs, so you would have to get a barrel swap to be able to actually suppress one of those. And the biggest issue with that SP5K as it originally came in was with the magazine release, because it didn't have the paddle magazine release. It just had the push button one on the side of the receiver, which frankly freaking sucks. In 2020 though, Heckler & Koch brought in the SP5K-PDW, which was a huge improvement over that original SP5K, and is essentially more or less the gun that I have here today. It had the 3-lug muzzle device on it, it had the paddle magazine release, so it was a major upgrade over that original. As far as clones or other imports on the US market, there's been quite a few different ones over the years. So of course you have MKE guns, either from Century Arms or from Zenith back in the day. They brought in MP5K length guns and they're still bringing them in. Also MAC, or Military Arms Corporation, is also bringing in a MP5K length gun as well today, so that is another great option. POF, or Pakistani Ordnance Factory, not POF in the US, completely different company. They also make licensed production MP5s and MP5Ks, and they brought those in quite a bit over the years. Now, that brings up another subject, which is there are some sub-variants for the MP5K and for the MP5. And those are going to be the stretch and the reverse stretch models. So a stretch MP5 is essentially the receiver for an MP5K with a full-size MP5 length barrel. So you have that 8.9-inch barrel with the 2 pinhole style receiver. And then you also have the reverse stretch, which is essentially the opposite. It's an MP5K length barrel, so that 4.5 or 5.5 with a flash hider on it, as well as the stock or the receiver from a full-size MP5, so you could utilize regular MP5 stocks with those. And POF brought in both of those variants. There have also been multiple US manufacturers of MP5 clones. So of course today we have my PTR Industries gun. PTR Industries has been in the HK roller delay blowback game for a long time, primarily with the G3 or their PTR 91. So they came out with their versions of the full-size MP5 as well as the MP5K like I have here today. You also had Dakota Tactical, which is really the fanciest MP5 you're going to get in the US. They're incredibly well made and incredibly expensive. There's also Zenith Firearms. They originally imported MKE guns from Turkey, and this is back in the 2010s going up till 2020. But now they are producing their own US-made MP5 and MP5K. And that's going to do it for the history of the MP5K. So let's go ahead and get into the review. And real quick, I want to give a big shout out to the Echo Valley Training Center in Capon Hill, West Virginia, where I did the testing for the MP5K, as well as a bunch of competitions over the years. So please check them out. And also please check out my Patreon if you want to support my ammo costs. That would be absolutely fantastic, but completely up to you. First up, we have accuracy, where the PTR 9KT is going to get a 4. At 25 yards using 147 grain Lawman ammunition, I was able to get a 3.9 MOA group out of this guy, which is very respectable for a K-length PDW. Next up we have Aftermarket, where the MP5K is going to get a 5, and it has a very expansive aftermarket just like the full-size MP5 because most of the companies that make full-size MP5 parts also make K-size parts. And a lot of the parts are also interchangeable between them, mainly talking about the trigger group, even though the trigger housing is different. First up, you have Midwest Industries, who makes different M-LOK handguards for the MP5K, as well as a 1913 end plate adapter, as well as top rails for different sights for these. These are going to take the same top rails and optic mounts as a standard full-size MP5. One thing with the PTR guns is these do have a welded on top Picatinny rail, so they will not work with the original MP5 ones, but you do have that Picatinny rail there. Next up, Haga Defense is also big in the MP5K. They make HDA3 brace system for theirs, flared magwell, monolithic rails, stuff like that. Then you also have Magpul makes an SL style handguard for the MP5K. They also make the ambi safety selectors for the SEF trigger packs, which are very nice and a good upgrade for these. You also have UTG, who makes a really cool upper monolithic M-LOK rail system, which essentially is a chassis which fits over the receiver of the MP5 and the MP5K. They also make claw mounts. There's also Brugger and Thomet, B&T. They make an APC style of stock for the MP5K, as well as their folding polymer stock, which they also have a version of for the MP5K. They also make different red dot mounts for the MP5 series. Next up, you have Spur, who also make different claw optic mount styles. You also have MFI, who is another company making different optic mounts for these. You also have Timney, who makes two-stage MP5 triggers, which are a big upgrade over the original triggers, which are not great. And then Franklin Armory makes a binary trigger for the MP5 series, which should work in both the K and the full size. And then you also have A3 Industries. They're big into making different foregrips, so you can swap those out. Then HK Parts makes multiple different types of grips for these. So they make the original style of pistol grip for the MP5K, which can be hard to find for the original HK made ones. They also make different lower housing groups. So if you want to put a Navy trigger housing on here, you can get one of those from HK Parts, as well as different optic mounts again for all the MP5 series, brace, slings, all that stuff you want, you can get it there. RCM, or Rim Country Manufacturing, is going to be very big as far as getting pieces for the MP5K. The biggest thing on the MP5K for suppressing it is you do want to swap out that original locking piece for an 80-degree one, and RCM makes those locking pieces, so that's an option to be able to replace that with if you can't get one of the original HK ones. Gibbous Outfitters is another company that makes stock adapters for the MP5K, so you can throw on a full-size G3 style of stock on there. Lee Sporting also makes a replacement trigger housing, which allows you to use AR-15 style triggers, and more importantly, things like a super safety or a force reset trigger, so that is a really cool option there that a lot of people are jumping onto. There are some complications with converting certain MP5s to work with a force reset trigger or a super safety, but I'm not really going to get into that in this video. And that's really all we're going to talk about for Aftermarket, but I'm sure I'm missing 100 different other parts for this guy. Next up, we have durability, where I'm going to give the MP5K a full 5. And again, the durability is going to be very similar to what you have with the full-size MP5. It is a stamped steel and welded receiver, which is very high quality and not prone to breakage at any point. The only things that you might want to replace fairly frequently are going to be your extractor spring. Those have been known to wear out somewhat quickly. But other than that, these are incredibly durable firearms. The finish on the PTRs I actually like quite a bit. It's more of a shiny paint style of finish, but it does seem to be holding up pretty well on my particular model. Now, one thing for durability on the MP5K in particular is suppressing them, because you can actually potentially damage the receiver on an MP5K if you suppress it, and that's due to the locking piece. Now, most MP5Ks come from the factory with about a 110-degree locking piece, which has a fairly fast unlock time, and that's going to be an issue with a can that adds back pressure, because if that bolt is moving at high velocities when it bottoms out at the back of the receiver, the rollers in that bolt head actually pop out to the side, and they can dent the rear of the receiver, and that's what's called roller dents, which is something that's pretty well known in the roller delay blowback community and kind of an issue that will eventually destroy your gun. For an MP5K, if you are going to shoot it suppressed, you do want to swap out that locking piece for an 80-degree one, and that will slow down the opening of the bolt so that it reduces the velocity at the end of its travel in the receiver and doesn't damage it. Now, it will still work with most of your standard ammunition unsuppressed as well. I have an 80-degree in mine here, and I have not had any reliability issues after installing that locking piece. Next up is Ergonomics, where the PTR 9KT is going to get a 3. So as far as controls go, they're going to be more or less the same as the full-size MP5. Starting out with the charging handle, it is just here on the left side. It is not ambidextrous, so lefties do have some problems with these sometimes. And again, there is no automatic bolt hold open on the magazine for the MP5. So you are going to have to pull it back and lock it up into the notch here and then give it the old HK slap. Again, that is totally fine to do with these. You're not going to hurt it by doing that. And overall, I do like it. It is non-reciprocating and it really doesn't get in the way. I also do like the original foregrip for the MP5K up here. It is very comfortable to use. You can wrap around there. You can put your thumb forward here. Just make sure you don't get out near the muzzle because that is bad for obvious reasons. But overall, do like that. Now moving back to the magazine release, the PTRs do have the classic iconic paddle magazine release down here. So that is a very nice feature, and that is fully ambidextrous, can get to that from both sides. And then it also has the entirely crappy button release here that I don't recommend anyone use, but it is there for whatever reason. Now, the PTRs are interesting because they do have this welded top rail on here, so you can't use any other optic mounting systems for the MP5, but this does give you a way to mount one from the factory. As far as the trigger housing goes, this is going to be non-ambidextrous, and on the PTR guns, it is the SEF style. However, the contours are a bit different from the classic SEF. It doesn't have the really high thumb wedges up here, so you can actually grip it as a lefty and not have it get in the way at all. So that is actually nice for the PTR guns. Your safety selector is going to be kind of high on the MP5K, and it's going to be a little bit awkward for some people who don't have long thumbs. For the PTR one, it also flips all the way down into the F position, but of course that is also only semi-automatic. Now moving up to the sights, for the front sight post, it is just completely standard MP5, nothing fancy there, and you can swap that out for a different post if you really want to. And one thing for the K on the rear sight is instead of the classic 4 aperture settings from the full-size MP5, you actually have notches here, and this is a holdover from when the MP5K didn't have stock on it, so this is a bit easier to use as a pistol. You can swap this out for an aperture style drum from a full-size MP5, but this is a way these generally come from the factory. Now moving back to the stock, this is the original Cho-8 stock that was adopted in the 1990s for the MP5K-PDW. A couple of things for this: you can just lift it up and flip it around to the side, and it does have a little bit of tension to it, so it isn't just going to flip out on you. Now, one thing to keep in mind though, when you do want to flip this back out, is the sling swivel here gets in the way quite a bit. So if you flip it out here, you'll see it's actually going to bump into the sling swivel there. And so that thing is going to be caught there. And then it can also, if it's standing up here like that, it's going to get in the way and you're not going to be able to lock the stock open. So just keep that in mind because you can flip it out and potentially break your sling swivel. And that's all we have for ergonomics. Next up we have maintenance, where the MP5K is going to get a 4. When it comes to disassembly, for the most part, is going to be very similar to the full-size MP5. The biggest difference is going to be the stock attaches with 2 of the non-captive HK style pins versus just the one on that original MP5 stock. The PTR version of the MP5 comes with a ledge style of lower receiver and trigger group, so you don't have to pull the pin at the front of the receiver. It will just lever right off of there, and then you can pull out your bolt carrier as well as a spring, and all of that is going to disassemble and clean pretty much the same way as the full-size MP5. Now, getting into the receiver, again, is going to be fairly difficult because they are tight receivers and there's a lot of nooks and crannies in there that you're going to have to be able to get your fingers in there with a cloth to clean out. The MP5 is notorious for running dirty, being a delayed blowback system. It is going to get a lot of carbon and gunk back in the receiver, so these do need to be cleaned every once in a while. However, even if they aren't cleaned for a while, the MP5s will still generally power through a lot of that gunk, and they are very reliable. When it comes to replacing the parts on the MP5, there are a ton of different parts out there for them. There are the original HK parts, and there are a couple of different places like RTG parts, HK parts, Blue Line supplies that carry those different MP5 original HK parts. So there's a ton of stuff out there to support your MP5, and if anything breaks on it, you have a broken roller, broken bolt head, whatever it is, trigger group, you are going to be able to find a replacement for it. However, they can be fairly expensive, particularly if you're going to get a factory HK part. They're not going to be cheap, but there are quite a few options out there, and anything you break on here, you're going to be able to find a replacement for. When it comes to modularity, I'm going to give the PTR 9KT A4. And again, for a gun that was designed for the K at least back in the 1970s, it's going to be quite a modular system because you can swap out the stock, you can swap out the trigger group as well as the trigger housing for something different, and the handguard is very easy to swap to something else. So there are a ton of options out there, and it's still a fairly modular system. The only thing you really can't change out from the factory easily at a user level is going to be the barrel. That takes a lot more expertise and tools to be able to do. So that is the one place where I'm going to be dropping off a point. When it comes to price, I'm going to give the PTR 9KT A3 because generally for the pistol version of this, without a stock, without an upgrade handguard, anything like that, is going to be going for around $1,500 and a little bit more than that nowadays. So as far as other options for the MP5K, there are definitely cheaper ones out there if you want to get that down to around $1,000 from Century Arms or from Mac. And then if you do want to spend the money for the Heckler & Koch SP5K-PDW, those are going to be much more expensive at closer to $3,000. In terms of shooting characteristics, the PTR 9KT is going to get a 4. Talking about the trigger, it is classic MP5, which is not great. It comes in weighing at about 7 pounds, 14 ounces, so a bit on the heavy side, but it's also fairly spongy without the cleanest break. So the triggers on these are fairly notorious and could definitely do with an upgrade. When it comes to the recoil impulse for the MP5K, it is definitely quite a bit stiffer than it is on the full-size MP5. You can tell that bolt's moving at a higher velocity and you're getting more impact from it. Now, that being said, it is still a delayed blowback system, so it is nice. I would put it closer to the level of the Strebog SP9A3 or the APC9 as far as the feel of the recoil, so you're definitely getting more from it. It's not going to be as nice as that full size. Now, getting into suppressing the MP5, of course I already talked about swapping out that locking piece, but for this guy I did only use my full back pressure can, my Rugged Obsidian 45, and the reason I did that was because the foregrip on the MP5K actually reaches out a bit further and makes it so the mounting system on my flow-through can for my TP9, my B&T can, would not fit on my MP5K. Plus, being an MP5K, it does look a lot better with a K-style short can versus that giant frickin' dong of a can that comes from the B&T. As far as suppressing it goes, you can tell that there is quite a bit more blowback from it than some other PCCs out there. You are getting a fair amount of gas to the face, and there is quite a bit faster bolt movement to it, so you get more recoil out of it with that full back pressure can. But overall, it's still not the worst suppressor host out there, but there definitely are better. In terms of reliability, I'm going to give the PTR 9KT a 4, and for the most part, these are very reliable guns. As long as you're using the pointed nose ammunition, like 115 or 124 grains usually come with 147 grains or hollow points where they have a flat nose, you still might run into some reliability issues with the MP5K, considering, again, it's an older system that was never really designed to work with those types of bullets, or at least those shapes of bullets. So you can still run into some reliability issues with those. When it comes to weight, I'm going to give the PTR 9KT a 3, and it's still fairly heavy, coming in at about 6.5 pounds. And some of that weight is actually going to be in this original Cho 8 stock. This Cho 8 stock is a bit of a chode of a stock. It's not the lightest one in the world. And there are some lighter ones like the B&T style of stock, which will drop off a couple of ounces at least, if not a pound or more from the overall build. But again, this is a stamped steel construction gun, so there is still quite a bit of pretty heavy material that goes into it, so it's not going to be super lightweight. And when we go ahead and add up all 10 categories for the PTR 9KT, we come out with a score of 39, which puts it up into the A tier. As far as positives go for the PTR 9KT and the MP5K in general, the accuracy on this is actually pretty good for a PDW length gun. The aftermarket is absolutely fantastic. It is still a very durable gun, being that MP5 system, as well as the shooting characteristics are pretty good compared to some of the other options out there. As far as the downsides go, starting off with ergonomics, these are very old guns, so the ergonomics kind of reflect that. They're a bit awkward to use, and they are nowhere near as modern as some of the other options out there. The price on the PTR guns in general are going to be a little bit higher than some of the other options out there as far as MP5Ks go. And then the weight on the MP5K is actually not all that lightweight compared to some of the other options. And finally, when it comes to the cool tier, I'm going to have to put the MP5K right up there in the S tier with the full-size MP5. And it's seen a lot of use in different movies and video games over the years. And speaking of movies, of course, being an older gun from the 1970s and 80s, this is featured in 80s and 90s action movies pretty frequently. For example, we have Lethal Weapon 2, Die Hard 2, RoboCop 2, Terminator 2. It seems like all of the 2 movies and action series have MP5Ks for some reason. It was also in The Last Boy Scout, Toy Soldiers, Beverly Hills Cops, True Lies, all of your who's who of 1990s action movies. And of course, we got to talk about The Matrix, where Neo picked one up in the virtual armory and then used it in the infamous lobby shootout scene. It was also in Lord of War, Bad Boys, Equilibrium, all sorts of other movies as well. One of my other favorite appearances of an MP5K was in the movie War Dogs, where Jonah Hill used it to intimidate some drug dealers. And then also they've been popping up in John Wick movies as well. So to this day, the MP5K is still very, very popular in movies. The MP5K is also very popular in video games, popping up multiple times in the Call of Duty series. So Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the MP5 was an MP5K. Then you also had Black Ops, the classic looking MP5K in there. Battlefield 3 had an MP5K, and then you also have some of the Rainbow Six games like Rainbow Six Siege. Alright guys, and that's going to do it on my review of the PTR 9KT, the MP5K clone. So thank you for checking out the video. Please like, share, subscribe, do all of that fun stuff, and stay tuned for more coming up soon.